Namaste. All. Today we have a very, very interesting evenings with Sraddhalu, and it will be concerning current affairs and questions of many people that have been pending. But the main topic is MAGA and MIGA. Make America great again. Make India great again. So welcome, Sraddhalu. It looks
Namaste.
to be a wonderful evening.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. So today's intention is to mostly take up questions which have been pending for the last several sessions. Each of those sessions became somewhat longer than usual, but I tried as far as possible to close each topic so that we don't have to come back and repeat certain things. There have been a lot of very interesting questions on email from the chat box as well as in the comments in the YouTube page, and some of which I've been able to put together, but I'm not sure we'll cover all. I'm not sure that I've been able to structure them also to make them sequential theme-wise, but we'll just take them as they come. And while those of you who are in the chat box, feel free to add questions if you like as we cover these. But before we enter the questions, I wanted to point to two particular recent events and what's happening behind the scenes. The intention here, remember, is to empower you to see through appearances, to see through the deception of the media, to see through the lies which are promoted as actualities intended to sway our thinking. You will recall in one of the texts we read from Sri Aurobindo last week, he actually tells you that media actually influences the mind, influences people's thoughts. So it's an intentional, well-known thing. There was an interesting video of journalists in a huddle. And this is way back at the end of Trump's first term, I think in the year 2019 or 20, when his tenure was coming to an end. And there was one video which we saw where publicly these news readers and talking heads were discussing, and one of them very angrily said, Trump is trying to influence what people will think, and that's our job, not his. So that's the reality of the news media. And for you to be able to break free of the hypnosis and the methods of manipulation they use, it's important to be able to see through their methods. So I'm pointing to two recent events. One is well known, one is not. The first is about this Air India crash which took place of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner taking off from Ahmedabad heading for London, which crashed within about 30 seconds of taking off. And initially there were reasons, some failure, some engine or some problems. As the thing moved to the formal investigation, the Air India management appointed a group of 5 people to investigate. They were formal investigators. Some of them were involved in prior investigations of crashed aircraft. Others were heads in institutions which looked after airline policy in the country. Now, if you look at the selection of 5 people, not one of them is technically competent, either regarding the machinery of aircraft or the role of a pilot and the pilot's viewpoint in flying an aircraft or what problems can come. But they were largely bureaucrats and people who knew things from outside how aircrafts run or policies. So but you can say, well, they would have investigated by talking to people who are competent and who are inside the experience, perhaps. But then what you saw was after a few days, suddenly there was a selective leak. And I'm pointing to selective leak because you see the signs. First, they said it's an interim report. It's not a final report. And in an interim report, if at all you had to put an interim report, you should have given something which showed largely the direction where you trust the investigation is heading. But what it did was, it gave a selection of Um, Conversation between the two pilot and the assistant pilot. It gave a conversation between them. One saying, "Hey, why did you stop the engines?" And the other says, "I didn't." They don't say who said what. They don't tell you what was the context in which this was said. And they said, we just see then, from the black box, that the fuel flow to the engine stopped abruptly. And then they don't say what was the further conversation. That's all. Now, this itself, a selective leak of this kind, you have to understand, is intended to swing your thinking a particular way. And there is so much more they could have. If they had to give an interim report, there's so much more they could have, which they didn't, which makes it suspicious. And then immediately after that selective report, selective leak, and this, by the way, this interim report was unsigned. There's no signature on it. So who's responsible? Nobody. And it's done intentionally because the goal is to swing the public discourse. Then you have one ex-pilot now coming up suddenly declaring, my theory is that it was crashed deliberately by one of the pilots. Immediately you see a large part of the Indian media leaping onto this, and then the foreign media leaping onto this. BBC took this up as a topic. The US various analysts took up this as a topic. One of them, and this is in fact on the Gateway Pundit, it's quoted there. One of the analysts says that one of the pilots was going through some melancholy. Melancholy is like you're emotionally disturbed, and he was taking medication for that. So these are the dangers of psychiatric medication. The whole thing was brought to the thinking of pilot's error. Pilots on medication, pilot may be deliberately crashing, or pilot having some insufficient sleep, blaming it on the pilot. Now, BBC similarly took a stance regarding pilot. All this is based on an interim report in which something has been selectively quoted and there's no signature. You see, nobody can be blamed. It's very cleverly done. And then the media feeds on this. Observe which media heads promoted this without justification and who went against it. And there already within your mind you'll start filtering who are reliable and who are not. This is generally the way you will approach. Whenever there is some falsehood in the media, overt, blatant, observe who's promoting it, who is the loudest in promoting it. These are either controlled cabal puppets, or they are useful idiots, or just opportunists who are in for the short-term money. In any case, they are no more reliable. You should drop them from your list of trustworthy sources. Then you see what happens. Fortunately, the Pilots Association of India came out with strong statements against this. And there's one particular article, which is, in my opinion, one of the best articles on what might have happened. And this is from an actual pilot. And I would like you to, for those of you who are interested, do take a look. It's the number one in my list of references. I have put many references. But the number one of that is actually the one where this person, being a pilot, gives you an analysis of everything that likely went wrong or could have gone wrong, and what are the typical kinds of issues, what actually should have been done to have a proper investigation, etc. And it's coming from a technical person. Someone like that should have been in that committee, first of all. Even if they had not, he points out straight away what they did not do. One of the things, for example, in the committee interim report is they give you a timeline. So many seconds down, this happened, this happened, this happened. Nowhere it tells you the height at which the plane was at that particular time. And this, the pilot points out, is the most critical element. If you want to do any analysis of a crashed craft, at what height it took place is critical. And that information is not there. So obviously this interim report was done by somebody who was incompetent, not technically qualified, but with an agenda. And what is the agenda in this case? To protect Boeing's reputation, to protect the fact that these planes have had problems consistently, going back years. And especially this particular problem, where suddenly the switches that control the fuel going to the engines suddenly shut off by themselves. And the mistake also that they make here in the interim report is they make it seem as if the pilot switched off. But in reality, these aircrafts are automatic, and the fuel control is handled by the artificial intelligence software sitting inside, not under control of the pilot. Pilot may not even have touched the switch, and it shuts it off there and the pilot is trying desperately to reactivate switches, but it's not in the switch side, it's on the control side, bypassing switches. Pilots don't have the control. That's the problem with these aircrafts. And this kind of problem has happened before. This was not mentioned in the interim reports. This kind of problem was flagged by the United States FAA, which is not mentioned in the report. This kind of problem is flagged by the UK, which had a few months ago just pointed out and said, hey, this is a danger, you need to watch this. It's not mentioned in the report. The fact that the same aircraft just before had come from Delhi to Ahmedabad and at that time had some major issues is not mentioned in the report. And it had issues of this kind, where some automatic functioning was not operative. That it has had repairs going back several years, where precisely this switchboard controlling the fuel was replaced twice already in the last few years as part of a routine replacement, not mentioned in the report. So straight away it shows you that the report itself was mischievously leaked. Observe this. Know what's happening. The goal is to protect the aircraft manufacturer. Perhaps there is even an interest for the airline to protect its own reputation and its bookings across so many aircrafts. What was interesting, in contrast, many of the Middle Eastern airlines and other East Asian airlines immediately ordered for their Dreamliner Boeings to have the pilots test and the engineers test these particular switches and the control systems, recognizing that it's a known problem with these aircrafts. So I've put several links regarding this for those who want to do a deep dive. It's worthwhile going through those links. So this is one example of how the news is swung or designed to swing your thinking and put your mind on a certain track so that people stop thinking that it's a failure of technology, that blame it on the human being. And of course, the human beings are not there to defend. But fortunately, there has been a correction. Many of the journals, newspapers, even in India, went out of the way to do their own investigation, and those links I have put. So this is one example. A second example, which also I have put, which is not well known at all, it's just something I found in passing, is an article in the Hindu, as I've told you before, it's a leftist journal, which is titled Inside Hostels from Mumbai to Chennai, How Biometric Surveillance Curfews Target Female Students. So it's interesting because this is written by somebody who is an activist. And you have to understand how these activists work. They have their own agenda for which their activism is, their training goes. And this particular article, it says, it's a premium article, I cannot see anymore now. It's written by somebody who is an activist for Dalit rights. And the activist, obviously, if you're an activist for Dalit rights, you have to somehow bring that into the picture. So the highlight of the article is, these particular hostels were for Dalit women students. Now, Dalit is a term which is undefined and it has no political or historical basis other than some recent labeling of a certain group of economically deprived people, labeled generally Dalit, which Mahatma Gandhi had labeled as Harijan, people of God. So poor people or who are in socially deprived communities, and these became terms. Now, the Dalit term, whenever you see it, you know that these are tied to evangelical objectives. Who use this term particularly? And anybody poor is categorized as Dalit because the term itself is not defined. So, and here you have an activist for Dalits now saying women who are at the age where they can vote are actually held in hostels where there is a mechanism for monitoring them and they are not allowed to have their freedom. They have to come back by 10 p.m. at home, and if they don't, automatically there's an SMS that goes out to their parents. And the schools which have the hostels actively promote this as a feature of their school. And so the demand here is the women should be free to do what they like, whenever they like, at any time of the day or night. And because of these rules, they are not allowed to explore the city after 10 p.m. Who goes to explore a city after 10 p.m.? So a lot of strange things in the way it is structured, but the message is this: remove all this. This is a suppression of Dalit rights. Why is this coming and where is it heading? Think about it. What's the agenda? Think about it. So a lot of things pass in this way, where there are activists who will push for certain agendas, and the agenda underlying finally in this particular case is a conversion agenda. But behind that is an activist agenda for Dalit rights, and even the term Dalit here is irrelevant because it's all girls who are in those uh, hostels. It's as if they were living in their parents' homes. If they go out late, what happens? What do the parents say? Hey, come back by 10. It's a normal thing in any conservative community. And India is largely conservative in these matters. You'll say, tell a girl who's before she is a certain age, you'll say, well, come home, be here in time. If you're not, then they start worrying, they start panicking. They may even start looking for the person or contact the police. This is normal in India, at least in most conservative spaces. Nothing wrong with that, except when you're going to a hostel, this is automated. Again, from a certain perspective, you might think it's completely normal. At least from the parents' perspective, it's even a relief because they know that no harm can happen. If at all there's a problem, they will know it. But the whole thing is swung in a particular way. Observe this, how rights are used for justifying or manipulating certain ways of thinking to push forward other agendas. I'm giving this as an example again, so that you become aware of how the media is used to shape your thinking. And there's one more which is in continuation of last time, where I was criticizing the working of the Supreme Court and generally of the legal system. And there's an article which just appeared a few days ago that while the previous Chief Justice of India had ordered glass partitions to be put across the Supreme Court for the cost of 2.6 crores. That's like about $250,000 US. And the glass partitions were put. He leaves, and within a few months, the next Chief Justice removes them at the price of 6 lakhs. Why? Where's the accountability? Nobody's accountable. When in fact the glass partitions were put, and the lawyers had protested against it, the Chief Justice did it anyway. So again, these are things you have to recognize. What does it mean? A large part of the funds there go into various pockets. That's generally how the whole system works, even when it passes through tenders within the governments. And this is all taxpayer money, just blown on a whim for whatever each bureaucrat normally would spend on, or politician, or in this case, judges would spend on, because of the kickbacks they get in terms of commissions. Typically what we understand in India is when there are public works, typical commission is about 50%. And this is the reason why so many roads get potholes very quickly, or many repairs are third rate. In Pondicherry, you will see each time they have to repair the roads go up by another 5 centimeters. And on the side, the gutters where the rainwater has to pass is sinking lower and lower until you could actually fall into a hole on the side of the road. And so the cars have to park 1 meter away from that steep fall. And after all that, the leveling of the gutters have not been done. So whenever it rains, water stagnates in the gutter, it never flows. And who's responsible? Nobody. Because that's the way the system is made. People get away with it. You can do nothing. You can see all this. You can criticize. You are helpless. That's the way the machinery of expenses is set up. Okay, I've digressed a little bit, but I wanted to leave you these 2 examples to see how you are being played, and be wary. See through the game. Question. Ask yourself who benefits from this angle. Don't get swayed particularly by these stories about rights, Dalits' rights, women's rights, LGBTQ rights, or whatever it is, which typically focus on some sentimental, emotional issue, or swing some other agenda with an emotional issue. Cut through and see, is this so? Whose interest is it? Who benefits? And often then you'll get an idea of the game behind. So, having said that, I would like to go ahead, proceed with some of the questions and some of the comments. I'll start with a few which related to last time's session regarding the judicial system. There's a very interesting email from Tutun who says, I served in the Judge Advocate General branch of the Indian Navy. One of the main duty of my branch officers are conducting court-martial against naval uniformed personnel. Court martials are based on the jury system. I have been trial judge for many court martial. It's a very detailed and meticulously conducted procedure. 5 or more odd numbers are selected based on their mastery on the subject matter and being senior of the officer being court-martialed. They should be of different units, ships, and not related to the accused officer. Now you see here already in the Navy, generally in the armed forces, you cannot afford to have visibly failure of justice. Because if in the armed forces you have no justice, the demoralization can be so deep that it will completely collapse the whole system. So generally speaking, the armed forces are a reference of what are good standards and effective governance. And so you see here, the people selected are selected based on competence. In the normal civil system, when you have a jury, they are picked almost at random. In this case, you are picked for this and of a certain seniority and someone who's not directly connected. Then she continues. The list of the jury is proposed by the Judge Advocate General of that particular command and approved by the Commander-in-Chief. The prosecution and the defense side both have the right to object to any of the jury members. Once the trial starts, it's day to day with breaks only for emergency or preparation by one of the sides. So you see, once you start, there's a momentum. You can't have a hearing now and then a month later come back and expect to have any continuity. It doesn't make sense. So it has to be day to day to keep the momentum of what you have understood and you're fully immersed in the issue. Once both sides present their sides, the jury cannot leave the courtroom until they give the verdict. You can't say, hey, I'm going to sleep over it, just take a few days. You can't be under influence. You are right there, you have to sort it out. When it comes to punishment, the trial judge advocate gives his recommendation, which the jury considers, and accordingly punishment is announced. The procedure is fast and mostly justice served. And just this, mostly justice served, shows that it's possible. And if you take this as a standard, it should be possible to do it everywhere, in all civil courts. It should be possible if the intention is there, if the genuine sincerity is present. You'll remember a message which the mother had given. Some politician in the 1960s came to the mother and said, what is India's greatest problem? So, typically the kind of answers people give, development, lack of money, education, people are not aware, people should be, you could make up any number of secondary or tertiary causes. She goes to the root of it. Root cause of India's problems? Insincerity. What is the solution to India's problems? Next question. Mother's answer. Sincerity. Think about that. Think about the implications. We have all the capacities. We have the people with competence. We have the resources. We have everything necessary. It's just insincerity, deception, intentional sabotage of one way or other based on interests or otherwise. And once you're sincere in your intention, you'll find a way it can be made to work. How is it that the most insincere people, the most corrupt, get into positions of power? Well, so then we go back to the bigger issues. But at the end of the day, it is just this. And what you see here in this excellent example in the Navy, it works. It's been working for decades. And despite people say, it's because standards have fallen, it's because post-British era, whatever education, despite all those things which means you may see in a decline in society, you have pretty much fast and mostly justice served within the Navy, for example. If they can do it, anyone can do it. But you see the key elements here: competence, intention, sincerity of intention. You must have these two things. You don't have these, you will get nowhere. So this was one I wanted to share. There's another comment from Mahesh. He says, taking a 2-month-long summer vacation when millions of cases are pending is in itself a crime against justice. If someone deserved that kind of break, it would perhaps be a heart or brain surgeon. So this is one of the features of the Indian British-derived judicial system, is that during British times, when it became too hot in summer, some of the British judges needed to go to colder places. And so they had a 2-month vacation. And that continues even today. the Supreme Court in New Delhi actually shuts down for 2 months, in which they do nothing. And the judges go on jaunts, they go on outings, they have bashes paid for by the taxpayer. There was recently a news item about how they were going to go to Hyderabad for a week, and all of them together, along with each one with their families. Or they do whatever they like, basically, for 2 months, for no reason at all, while everybody else in the country is working all through. So it's again a question you have to ask, how is this even possible? And either they have to feel their conscience, or someone has to say, hey, this is a remnant of the British colonial time. Do we still need it after 70 years? When nobody dares speak up, or if they do, you will be pushed under by the authority of the judge. Rajarshi asks, do you have any information on how lawyers are educated in our country? And what is the mindset among lawyers, and how has this come about? Yes, I have seen a little bit closely, and I can't say it's a description of everywhere in the country, but I've seen it a little bit because I've been in touch with many lawyers, some who actually chose to enter the system, some who got in and then recognized their mistakes, and then some who didn't even want to get in. They just needed the lawyer tag so that they could do whatever it is that they needed. And it generally works like all other exam systems. There's a lot of corruption within the examination system itself. The standards are very weak, and if someone wants to get through to be a basic low-grade criminal lawyer, you can get through. Once you're through, after that, basically you build on reputation and who you've worked with, what cases you were involved with directly or indirectly, and then you can go up. After that, what happens beyond a certain point, you go up the chain because of your reputation, which often is associated with your family. You had a High Court judge or Supreme Court judge in your family, you get up very quickly. So generally that's what you will see currently. All the big names are, big lawyers are often in the families of judges. So yes, there's an advantage because obviously if you were in a judicial family, there's a certain standard of values, but it's not the case with everyone. Many of these are political appointees, and political appointees are some of the worst. They are appointed by the government. For example, let's say the Pondicherry government across the years, I'm not saying any particular party, would have appointed a local prosecutor which would be representing the government's cases. These people are the worst because they have a political appointment. They have to feed back money to the politicians who have put them in that position. How do you make money as a judge or a government judge? By losing cases. So the other side comes and says, we will pay you so much if you weaken your case so that we win. Now when the government loses, who's losing? Whose personal interest is it to protect and ensure the government doesn't lose? Nobody. The politicians don't care. They're there to loot. The bureaucrats don't care. They're also interested in looting. Who is there who stands and says, it's my government and you can't take away the money from me? That would have been the case if there was a king, for example. Here there's nobody. So everybody happily lets the government lose. And how much money can you make in the process of getting the government to lose? By getting money from the other side, by delaying as much as possible unless the other side pays. And whatever money is made then goes back to the politicians who appointed you. So often, the government prosecutors are the worst in terms of corruption. And unfortunately, they then, because they had that authority, they get promoted because they were government prosecutor such and such time, and then they go up the chain because of the importance they gained. I'm not saying everybody is like that, but this is how the system is. So there are, of course, those exceptional people who stand for what's right, but it's extremely difficult to stand for what is right in a system like this. You are abused, and again, I've seen, heard some of these actual cases where the politicians will come and threaten you in the most abusive terms, and even sometimes threaten your life or your family's security if you don't do what they demand. That's the reality at the ground. So it's really bad, the situation. And the problem here is, how can a lawyer become a good judge? Because the mentality of the two is totally different. The lawyer has to win the case come what may. And he shouldn't have to care what is true or what is right. Judge has to go the other way. You can't have a lawyer becoming a judge and then expect him to think differently. It's not going to happen just because you change sides on the chair. So the Modi government actually started to create a new system where judges would be trained to be judges from the beginning and not go through the system of being lawyers. I do not know where that is, how far that has moved, but it faced a lot of resistance initially. But this would be a better way, certainly, of moving forward. So this is just to point out that there are huge lacuna, and this has never been discussed seriously. There is no attempt even to sort these questions. Sumana has a comment. It is strange that judges are referred to as my lord. And when someone talks something about judiciary, people tend to say with due respect. It is as if the judiciary and judges are equivalent to God in the religious system, where we are not supposed to question anything and always supposed to obey. Yes, that's the interesting thing. And a lot of this comes from a time when judges were actually respected. And in society, they were greatly valued as representatives of truth, at least in India. That was the culture. And so, inevitably, you yielded when the judge said, no, this is right. If it was a subjective decision, you yielded because you took the person to be honest, genuine, and actually having a large perspective and wisdom, whether he is able to justify fully or not. This was the truth, let's say. This was the attitude generally going back centuries. So when suddenly somebody is put in that position, and then he says that I will be blind, justice is blind, and I will now pass a judgment based on what a text says or what a word was mentioned this way or that way, or a word was missing or not, and on that basis you pass orders, then it's a failure of justice. But it takes a while for people to recognize that it's an inherent failure of the value system itself. I've mentioned before, in Madras High Court, for example, when a judge walks, so in the Supreme Court, you don't see a judge walking because they have their own back doors. They come into the hall through a system where you never see them. They have their own entrance, they come in from the back, they have their own isolated existence. The way the Madras High Court is structured, it's not like that. So they have to come from their judges' quarters to the hall where they will have their hearing. So they have to pass through the same corridor where the normal people, the victims of law and the lawyers are going. So when they are walking, there's a peon dressed up in the fancy dress from the British times of what a king's assistant and announcer would be dressed as. The judge is dressed as if a king. This assistant is holding a staff which represents the authority and power of the king, and he's walking down the corridor, and from a distance of about 20-30 meters, he starts making a hissing sound. Hiss, like that. It's very ugly. Hissing sound like a snake to tell you ordinary fallen victims to move aside because you are like cockroaches in the path of the great king. And when you hear that hissing sound, you're supposed to move aside, you're supposed to lower your gaze and bow down as the judge walks in front of you, led by this person. And the judge is walking like this, preening as if he's, I don't know, it's something so perverse. As if just by the act of putting on those clothes and being on that chair, he's a superior human. And often knowing he's the most corrupt person in the whole building. And they walk like this. And they don't look at you. And the airs they put on, this whole culture of, I will say, falsehood, pretense of appearances. This whole culture is steeped in. And I would still go back to a time when perhaps it was justified that the person represented something and people would willingly, happily perhaps bow down for what the person represented, but today not one person has respect. And yet this person preens as if he is the most important. It is hypocritical posturing. And it's sad to see because it also works in their mind to give them that impression that they have that power and authority. Yes, it's unfortunately taking the place of God, but that's how it was originally conceived, that law itself and justice was God-given. And so the person who's giving it out is in some sense representative of an authority that comes from God. That was the original idea. V-Truth commented, angry and tired listening to this, How should we move in society now? Should we be bold and speak the truth no matter the consequences? So my general observation would be we should speak. We should discuss. Because until society starts discussing these issues, nothing is going to happen. And we cannot sit back and say, well, somebody else has to raise it, somebody else has to solve it. No, all of us are responsible. Not all of us have the same say, not all of us have the same reach, not all of us have the same influence. But we all share in the responsibility. If you have not done your part, you have no right to say the other person didn't. Once you have done your part, then you can criticize somebody else for not having done their part, isn't it? So yes, I will say you should speak up. I won't say no matter the consequences. You have to be wary of the consequences, and you have to balance how much you speak, in what way you speak, with the consequences that you are willing to bear or not. And so it has to be balanced out. I'm making a general statement, depending on what you need to speak. Ensure that when you do speak, you have also prepared yourself with all the opposing viewpoints, and you are sufficiently founded on data that you can convey if people show interest or challenge it, and then say what you have to say. Otherwise, the simplest thing you can do is to raise questions. Why is it like that? Can it be different? Is there a better way? And you can even suggest a better way. Perhaps this shouldn't we consider, at least try this out or try that out, or at least discuss. That much you can always do. And even if the positions are not absolutely correct or the best, at least you start a dialogue and discussion. That's my position in this regard also. I'm not saying everything that I am sharing with you is entirely right. Perhaps my data has been partial, defective, or even wrong. But with what I have, I'm trying to present what seems to me a reasonable direction of assessment or action or understanding of things. And then you have to do your own research, and perhaps you will come back with discoveries which are different, and I'll be happy to learn from that also. But unless we start that process, and unless it becomes a part of the culture of the people, you will always be subject to the rulers and without real freedom that you can assert. And there has to come a time when these judges walking in the corridors, yes, we will respect them because of the position they have, but they cannot put up such hypocritical airs. They cannot look down at you as if you're a cockroach. They can smile, they can be there, and we can be respectful to them. Yes, that can come with a job, but this pretense and fakery needs to go for sure, and many other things which would follow from there. So we have a few other questions now. I'm going to go back to some of the questions which were from the previous discussions, the first few discussions we had, which were regarding what happened in Iran also. And Rajarshi had put a question, can you please explain why it is strategically necessary to prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons? It seems in practice the weapons power itself deters its actual use. Yes, that would be the case for someone who has a sense of responsibility. I'll just give an example. Between India and Pakistan, at no point either Indian politicians or in the military has anyone ever said these nuclear weapons will be used. They're meant to be used against Pakistan. Always the stand of the government and the military was no first use. It's only there as a defensive measure. On the contrary, during Operation Sindoor, some of the Pakistani politicians openly said, and the military chief also openly said, that these weapons will be used, and if push comes to shove, that they will be used against India. Now, this makes a fundamental difference of values. Iran particularly has openly stated that the nuclear weapon is going to be used, not maybe or might be, will be used against Israel first and then against the United States. It's openly stated that as an object. Second point also you see in the duplicity that while repeatedly stating that there is no nuclear program, they have actually gone ahead and done everything which they have claimed they have not done. So all through now a couple of decades that they have claimed not to be making a bomb, they have done everything necessary to make a bomb, and it's open, it's already available, the data is there. And that itself shows you an agenda which is mixed. Third point I would say is, remember always the question is, ultimately who will control the weapons? And in this case, it's not even the people of Iran, it's not the civilizational values of Iran or Persia. It's a group that is built around a certain hate value system. And this hate value system, unfortunately, goes really, really deep, and it's an ideological hate value system. It has no other reason than a belief system. Like you saw, I've mentioned other examples before. It comes from the religious programming of a particular form of thought. And as long as you live by that unthinkingly, not irrationally, not based on larger interests, that kind of power is extremely dangerous. Again, the track record is, you see Iran funding the Hamas, funding the Hezbollah. For what? And you see there again the kinds of problems. It's a crude, low-grade terrorism based on the idea of a reward in heaven for having killed those who are not following your way of thinking. And that's very dangerous. So this is broadly what I would see as, and maybe there are other reasons, this is what I would see as primary reasons why a weapon in that space is dangerous. Even if you look at Russia or the US or China, and while there have been posturings in the past during the Cold War of counting how many nuclear weapons each one has had, etc., it was rarely taken in this kind of irrational way. It was always seen in terms of, oh, but they have so much, if they attack, we would have to have so much to counter, or we need superior weapons, and things like that. But it was never an ideological fundamental hate of wanting to destroy the other. We did have in the United States particularly the cabal using this as a kind of a fear-mongering to keep its population under control and to keep them malleable for their agendas. And that's what we have described earlier in many ways. One of these was what the US president described as the military-industrial complex. They need to have wars continuously going forever for their profits, for their survival. And for that purpose, it was necessary for them to keep the populace in a state of fear. And as long as they are able to sustain the fear, they can justify the funding that comes to maintain their machinery, for which they had to create wars, for which they even funded terrorists against whom then the war had to be done. Very few people might remember now, Osama bin Laden was in fact a CIA asset. Not formally, was till the end. So even when this happened, that the 9/11 attacks took place, the US had to find somebody to blame. They blamed him, knowing full well he was at that time an active CIA asset. He was only doing what the CIA had asked. So when first Bush announced that it was coming from Osama bin Laden, he actually went on air saying that we never did it, we would never do that. And that was blocked by the US media. So straight away you start wondering, how is this possible? That was the game played by that group. And I'll link this to a discussion which I saw last time, particularly among some of the viewers in the chat box, where there was a criticism. I could not quite make out what it was. It was a criticism of somebody criticizing the United States and things like that. Others saying no. I couldn't make out exactly because it was not too clear. But this is where I want to bring in the clarity. At least this is how I would see things, or I would suggest that you see things. Never blame an entire group or a country or a people. It doesn't work. Look at the different layers. Look at the different interests. Look at what they stand for. And then be clear to criticize either the interests or the ideology or the mindset or a specific group that follows that, not the entire country. So in the United States, for example, and there's a lot of good that the United States stands for. When it first broke away from British rule, it became a space for freedom. And it was true. Anybody could literally catch a ship, go to the US, start a new life. At the same time, while this is happening, you have also the backlog of the killings of millions of the Native Americans in the most brutal way sometimes. There is also that. There is that karma. There is this freedom. You can't say because of that karma that this is wrong. You can't say because of this that is justified. They are independent things. It happened with different groups at different times. Behind that, there are forces which play also. And some of these forces are evolutionary forces. And at that point, it's very difficult for people to reduce a certain turn of events because of the suffering that it involves. Very often, large evolutionary movements involve literally a power that tramples over whatever resists. It may still be an evolutionary force, but it tramples over, in the process destroys anything that resists or opposes that change. It may, in human terms, be translated through wars, through conflicts, and through other diseases or accidents. And there is suffering always, because, well, people die. And it's difficult at that point to say, hey, it's an evolutionary force. But this is how it is. So when you look at Tibet, and you will remember, I can quote this because I can say this on the strength of the mother's own observation, that it was the consequence of a certain release of the force which worked to free the Tibetan people and the block in which they had got stuck, where mother says the dead people had more importance than the living. So the Chinese invasion effectively was a consequence of that. Now you can't say because of that the Chinese invasion was justified. That would be wrong. You can't say that the killing of the Tibetan people was justified. No, that will be wrong. You cannot say that the replacement of the Tibetan people by the Han Chinese and the complete dissolution of the original culture is justified. No, that would be wrong. But nevertheless, you have to see that there are evolutionary forces behind which compelled that change. Now, if the Tibetan people had recognized and lived up to the demand of the times, perhaps this invasion would have been unnecessary. So this is how things work. It's complex sometimes, unfortunately, and then we are in the middle of battles of forces of the light and forces of the darkness and interest groups through which they work. So it's the same thing when you look at the US. So yes, it was a space of great freedom. It was also a great space of great suffering in certain transitions. It also has become subsequently, post the Second World War, a focal point for a cabal that has, so to say, taken control. But the control is only through the media and through narratives and through education. So you can't say that the American people are responsible for the cabal objectives. Very often the people themselves rebel against certain policies of the government. But if they are played right psychologically, they will align to the policies. For example, with the 9/11 attack, everybody in the United States said yes, go ahead and attack the Middle East, not knowing they had been played. So again, they are victims of the same cabal group. So you can't say the people are nasty. We can say at best that they couldn't see through the game of being manipulated. But how many of us are really capable of seeing through? And so it's a part of the evolutionary growth also for us to be misused in this way, to be programmed in this way, until we learn to break free of it. And there are others still passing through that struggle of waking up. So it's very difficult to label a whole group or a country. Recognize rather the trends. And for me, this is more important. The changes that have come with Trump and other disruptors that we have been talking about for these sessions. And understand that behind this is a larger force, an evolutionary force, which is trying to break the grip of the cabal, which is helping people wake up, and that's not happening easily. A lot of people who are against Trump are genuinely believing whatever it is that the media has told them. There's a very interesting report I saw, it was only yesterday that I saw this. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the link to post it in the group. But this is the head of, the owner of one of the biggest chains of sales chains in the United States. And in an interview with a left television platform, I think it was with CNBC, that the person said, they asked him, well, what's your take on what's happening currently in the United States? And he says, initially I had voted against Trump. And initially I was critical of all his policies with this trade wars and sanctions and the duties that he has started, global duties war. I was against it. But now I begin to see he's right. Why? Because the data was hidden from him by the media. And as eventually the data leaked through, he saw the data, he says, I actually agree with Trump. And then he says, I think he will go down as one of the greatest presidents the US has had. Now, this is a man who voted for him and was critical of him all these years, has suddenly flipped recently in the last 1 month. And this is a person in the industry. He knows his business. He knows how it's going to affect his business. And he's seeing a positive turn there. And so today's discussion I have titled MAGA, MIGA, etc. MAGA is Trump's slogan, Make America Great Again, to which we have to add Make India Great Again, Make China Great Again, Make Iran Great Again, Make every country great again on its own terms, in its own value system. But for that, it means people have to wake up from this cabal control and mindset. And that's really the struggle. That's the whole point. So I've put that as a general title for all the questions and themes we're discussing. But this is a very good example I wanted to share of how people in the industry, once they see the data, because what Trump is doing is extremely rational. It's not knee-jerk reactions. It's not chaotic. It's very well thought out. It's the media which presents it in this perverted form. And you have to be careful to distrust the media. So there was one conversation which I saw, one question from Nitin. Is Trump still in touch with the guidance that was working out the big picture of the world through him, that when you introduced us? And Ramkumar commented, in his last term, Trump did not engage with Pakistan, withdrew financial aids, but now he's hosting the Pakistani military chief on a luncheon, and he keeps repeating he made peace deals between India and Pakistan. And Rajiv comments, Trump is a useful idiot in Divine's play. He always looks for personal benefit and USA first. Mahesh writes, I beg to differ. Trump is certainly not a reformer. He has slipped into the hands of the deep state. The Epstein files prove it, etc. So there were many comments. I'm not going to read all of them, but I went through all that. I wanted to comment here. So be careful. A lot of these impressions come from the way the media is playing you. So they will often present something which is entirely false as if it is Trump's position, which it never was. I remember I'd given this as an example. In Trump's first term, there was a huge media show about how Trump was going to cut down funding to NASA. And for 2 months, they were pushing this. And then suddenly when Trump brought out his actual NASA policy, he had increased funding. He had set deadlines for major breakthroughs. And one of those was in the year 2024, they would again put an American on the moon. So after he lost, or rather after Biden took over, Biden weakened those agendas, and now the moon landing is scheduled for 2026. Let us see if they maintain it. But the reality was Trump had actually pushed forward the entire NASA development programs. And why did the media lie? And what did they do when actually Trump did this? They played it down. Instead, they tried to show as if what Trump was doing was out of some impulsive, emotional reaction and that he was not thinking it out. The agenda he had put itself was irrational, etc. So always the tendency is to reverse and give you the opposite idea of what Trump is actually doing. So it gives you an impression that he is working for personal benefit. And he's an idiot. No, he's not. Even at that time, they gave you all these stories that he was sitting watching TV all day. No, it's all made up. In fact, what Trump had largely in his structure of day was executive meetings. Executive meetings are work-related. And they're planned months in advance, those time slots. So you can't be telling 1 month later, I'll be discussing that crisis. Obama's schedule was meetings with bureaucrats, businessmen, etc., which could be scheduled months in advance. There was no governance-related issues. Trump is handling crisis and governance-related things. So the agenda structure was very different. But what he was doing, and what you see again similarly with Modi or with Elon Musk, he's pushing agendas, demanding that there is performance. He takes performance appraisals. Where there is something goes short, he makes corrections, etc. So his interest, and this is a lecture which he had given way back when he first stood for election. He said, I had the most comfortable life. I did not need to get into all this to make money. I don't need to. He's already a billionaire many times over. He lost money after getting to the US presidency. On the contrary, Obama, when he came to power as president, he had $3 million as savings. When he left the US presidency, he had something like $150 million. So they made money being president. Trump lost money in $500 million at least. because of all the attacks. And knowing full well, he stuck on because his agenda is very different. It is to make America great again. And what is that agenda? It's a very selfless agenda. It involves a lot of personal suffering, personal loss, but for something much greater. So, about the Epstein files also, I would simply say, in the last 4 years, when the Democrats were in power, when the Epstein files were in their hands, why didn't they release anything if there's anything against Trump there? There is nothing against Trump. And even now you see a hit piece that just appeared in New York Times and the Washington Post. Both of these are hardcore leftist agencies, anti-Trump. And in the hit piece itself, you find so many falsehoods. And the way they play you with innuendos and suggestions. The reality, for example, you go to any party where there are a few hundred people. Trump is there, Epstein is there. So, what they would say is, he went to parties with Epstein. No, he didn't go with Epstein. He was in the same party in which a few hundred people were there. On the contrary, you find actually Epstein Island, you had people like Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and all the big names in the US media going to the island. Trump never went to that. And that's when they had a lot of their child molestation and other things. So, all of this was in the hands of the Democrats. At no point did they bring out anything against Trump. And it shows you there's nothing against Trump there. There is something more complex which is taking place. You see, if you have to take action against people who were clients of Epstein, you need, of course, the list. But once you have the list, you need to have proof. You can't just say, hey, you went on a plane ride. That's not enough. Oh, you went to that island. That's not enough that you actually did something. So it has to stand in court. So the question really is, having a list of names, what can you actually do that is relevant, that will give you the authority to, or the evidence with which you can prosecute somebody. That evidence was already removed during the 4 years when Biden was ruling. So what is left for Trump's DOJ is very little in terms of what they can do. Yes, they can do other things, and that is still to be seen. And very likely things will happen. But what I'm showing you is this whole thing about the Epstein files that the media is trying to turn as if against Trump is a cover for the fact that the names of people going to the island are largely the people that we have described generally as part of the deep state or the cabal. And Trump is not as part of that. So Trump knows what he's doing. He knows what battles to fight, what are the priorities. Now you'll see actually very quietly he has been focusing on something else. And I'll point to two things which have been happening. First, during the time when they had all these cases against Trump during his first tenure, and particularly there was the hoax of the Russia, we may call it Russia Gate. The evidence was totally cooked up and there were high-level people who were involved. All that evidence has now been brought out and they are moving to prosecuting the people who were behind it. This is going to be big and a lot, and this is with proper evidence, which is in their hands. This is one very big step that you're going to see. It's already started. Only today you saw first signs of the news. And you'll see that on the Gateway Pundit, for example. It's very visible. It'll hit mainstream media in a few days, perhaps, once actually those cases are put. And the mainstream media will try to twist it as Trump being vengeful against his opponents. No, it's not. It's actually prosecution of the same people. And many of these would have gone to would be on Epstein's list. But you can't prosecute them on Epstein's list. You can prosecute them for these things. This is one very important thing happening. The second thing which is also happening and Trump has been working upon in terms of prosecution is just slipped my mind. I had something else to. It'll come back. So what I was pointing to is you have to move with the battles which are winnable first. Start with the things which are easy to do, but you also see which are, even if they are difficult, which have long-term consequences. So it's a choice that he has to make strategically, and some of these involve long-term consequences, so they may take time before they fully fructify. So there have been quite a few there's been a massive cleanup that Trump has been involved in. I mentioned last time Doge, which was cleaning up unnecessary expenses. They had, for example, more credit cards in the government's name in the hands of bureaucrats than the number of people who had credit cards. So each person had 2 or 3 credit cards sometimes. For what? And it was just money that they were spending for all kinds of things. Many of these were cancelled. Many people were removed from the list of credit cards. A lot of cleanup there on the economic side. But the bigger battles that Trump is fighting, which involve removal of corrupt judges, removal of corrupt politicians, because if you want to clean up a system, it takes much more time. And all of these have to be based on actual data that they have. So there's one more point I wanted to share. It will come back later. Rajarshi made a comment. Anything news outlet educated liberals say is propaganda, like Fox News. It will at least give you some exposure to both perspectives, even if you don't believe all that they say. Yes, to some extent. There are what are called right-wing news agencies, Fox News being one of them. It will give you some idea, but you must understand that's also part of the uniparty. So from what I've seen also, they don't always go to the core. They often edit. Whenever they give you a quotation for Trump selectively, then you know that it's not the full picture. And you know that they are biased. They're trying to create an impression. They're playing with impressions. So you always go back to the source. Go back to those who give you the source and the full source. So one which I'm openly recommending is the Gateway Pundit, because I found it to be consistently reliable in what it gives. And it's also deeply rooted in the overall agenda of Make America Great Again. There's another major shift which Trump has brought about, which is in the health aspect. So there's MAGA and there's MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. So you see, in America they had some of the most debilitating, harmful food additives and food products, and at the highest prices in many cases. So I'll just touch upon this as an example. You had the same companies across the US and Europe selling exact same products under exactly the same name, but the ingredients were totally different. In Europe, certain poisonous ingredients being banned, they would replace those ingredients by more healthy ingredients. But in the United States, where those ingredients were not banned, they would continue to use the same poisonous ingredients. And it's a question I would simply ask you, why? That means knowingly they are putting poisons into your food in the United States and everywhere else where they can get away with it. It's only when the law demands that you don't use certain poisons that they will stop using them, only out of fear. So it shows you, first of all, many of these fast food and FMCGs, fast moving consumer goods, chips, soft drinks and others, many of them do not have your interest in mind. They don't care if they poison you. Well, it's the same banks who invest in them, who invest also in the pharmaceutical companies from whom you'll buy the medicines to get well once you get sick from the other food. They don't care. They just make profits. So this was a point which was often raised, and one of the persons I would highly recommend for you to watch is somebody called Vani, and her lady, she's an Indian based in the United States, and her channel was called The Food Babe. I think she had Instagram, Facebook and various channels. So The Food Babe is what you would search for. And what she was doing was exposing all this. This has been going on for years. So if you were interested in your health, you would watch those and then get frustrated at the fact that you had no choice. If you were living in the US, those foods had those poisons. Then she would show you which foods didn't have those poisons, so at least you could make a choice. But what happened under Trump was, when he appointed RFK Jr. as his head for the health department, this man has started a cleanup of the health system itself. Earlier, the United States had a revolving door. The Food and Drug Administration head would then go into the pharmaceutical industry. Pharmaceutical industry formerly would come into the Food and Drug Administration or other. So they were swapping places all the time, and they were all in it together in the scam. What he did was, RFK cleaned up the whole system, or started cleaning up. And one of the things they had was they got Vani to come and actually speak up in a Congress hearing, subsequent to which they have passed certain orders banning certain chemicals and additives. And yesterday Trump announced that Coca-Cola company has agreed to remove high fructose syrup and replace by actual cane sugar. Now, why did Trump announce this? because this involved negotiation, and negotiation involving also threat. He said, either you fix it yourself or we're going to pass a law and then you will face consequences. So Trump is always, as a negotiator, you must understand, it's not just about taking credit. It's about getting it done. And if you can get credit, well and good. If you can't, you don't mind that. So he did it in a certain way. He did take credit, but without saying that he threatened them. He said, oh, see, they have agreed. So nice of them. They have agreed under pressure, obviously. But there are many such things which are being done to clean up the whole health system in the United States. And that's MAGA, Make America Healthy Again, which should apply also all other countries. We have to start looking at the reality of this. The other thing Trump did was also to bring down costs of the pharmaceuticals. So typically what would happen, the companies based in the United States, pharmacy companies, the same product they sell everywhere on earth, generally, at half the price, sometimes 1/10 the price. So people in the United States would drive to Canada, buy their medicines, come back into the US, and the price differential would make the cost of the trip itself justified with profits. That's the kind of high prices that existed. And Trump, interestingly, got someone from the pharma industry to join his team and start this cleanup in the first tenure itself. And in this one, he has managed to, again, bully them or negotiate with them to bring down drugs prices. And this is one of the very big dramatic achievements. So this is where I want to also make a comment on the price wars and the threats that Trump has made. I have to see, there was another question. Somebody had asked this question about why is Trump attacking India about the prices, and why are so Revati has asked, there was news about closed Trump aid suggesting that the US is going to throw an economic bomb on India, China and Russia. Why are Trump's activities seemingly anti-India? Is India's non-alignment policy good, or should we align with countries with common interests? So it's not against India. It's about protecting US interests. For example, US was exporting cars made in the United States to Germany, and the duty that the US had to face in Germany was 10%. Germany made cars and sold in the US for some 2 or 3%. Why this imbalance? There was no good reason. And whom did it benefit? It only benefited Germany. So US car industry said, hey, if we are exporting from the US, manufacturing in the US, we are losing so much, we cannot compete with German cars. So they wanted to move the car production to Mexico, where it would be cheaper, and Germany wouldn't have 10% tariffs if you import from Mexico. So the car company would benefit, would profit, but what happens? All the work, all the labor, all the industry is going to Mexico. What is the US getting? Nothing, except it is getting conned by buying cheaper German cars with no other problem. You can't buy your own cars because they're too expensive, and the German cars come cheaper. It's one of those very strange things you find in India, for example. Apples grown in Australia are and brought across the ocean to India are cheaper than apples grown within India and transported by maybe 1,000 kilometers at most. Why? You have to look at the economies, and the only way you can protect your locally grown apples is by putting some restrictions. And if you don't do that, you will destroy your own local industries. The jobs will go out, the technology will go out, and your economy collapses. So Trump is correcting that trade imbalance. He says, well, if you put 10%, we will also put 10%. The media is not telling you the full story. The media is saying Trump threatened Germany. No, he didn't threaten. He said this is unbalanced. Let's set right the balance. It's a very reasonable negotiation. And it's the same thing he's doing with all the countries. And sometimes, yes, he has also threatened. And the threat is very simple, that if you do certain things which will harm the US dollar, and this was the real threat at that point, because initially the intention was to create an alternate currency to bypass the dollar. If that happens, the dollar will sink, the US economy will collapse. And so there he threatened. He said, that's like a military attack. There I will put counter measures against it. So Modi immediately backed off and said, we will not go for an alternate currency. But where it concerns our interests, we will protect those. But it won't be by creating a currency that will sink the dollar. So there are complex trade negotiations ongoing, and as part of a negotiation strategy, it is very normal, and remember Trump is a businessman, that first you propose something very high for negotiation, and then you drop it until it comes to a stage where you are accepting and they are accepting and both are happy. That's when the negotiation stops. But you don't start by proposing what you have, because the next step will only drop it lower. You start with something very high. So he will start with 30%, and then he'll say, all right, we're going to impose it next week. And then next week he says, okay, we're going to defer it by 1 month because those people have agreed to discuss. So let's discuss. It's a negotiating strategy. It's the media which spins this around and makes it seem like it's ad hoc, disruptive, and impulsive, unthought, etc. Not at all. It's very, very carefully thought out. And you see the way he praises. He says, Xi Jinping, oh, he's a very good friend. Will negotiate. He's a smart guy. He understands. He talks like this. He's a negotiator. He's a businessman, and he's talking business. That's all he's doing. And he's doing it reasonably. It's not unreasonable. It's very rational. So yes, threat has been used, but specifically there where America was threatened by this group of companies, group of countries. So Nikhil asked, how do you react to Pakistan's recommendation of Nobel Prize for Trump? This was incidentally followed up by a comment Trump made, which the other media promoted as if he's some kind of an egoist, where Trump said, I'll never get the Nobel Peace Prize, although I have done this. He lists 5 things, all of which should have deserved him a Nobel Peace Prize, or any peace prize for that matter. Obama, who did nothing, got a peace prize just for being elected. He did nothing at all. In fact, he started wars. So that's the way the media plays, and the cabal rewards its own. But Trump will never get that, although he lists the 5 things, and they're all genuine. I've mentioned already before, what he did with the Abraham Accords should have got him a peace prize straight away. It changed completely the scenario in the Middle East. For the first time, literally, for the first time, many of these 5 countries and Israel worked together as one team. Peace was set in the Middle East, and now he's expanding that. And many other things he has done similarly. Not all known, media never reports these. But why did Trump take the trouble to mention all these and list them and say, I will never get the Nobel Peace Prize? Because he already knew the game being played. The game was this. First of all, it was Netanyahu who had proposed initially that Trump should get the Nobel Peace Prize. And then there were several who joined, and then Pakistan was one more which added to the Nobel Prize suggestion, and all with good reason. But the reason for proposing may have been others, that's not important, but it was justified. But what will happen, the Nobel Committee itself and the mainstream media will play this. What they will do, they will give the prize to somebody who's opposed to Trump, and then play the game as if, see, Trump was hoping for this, he got deceived, he's now sad. Trump broke that whole drama, that whole strategy by declaring straight away he'll never get it. Having said that, whether it comes to him or not, very likely it will not happen. It doesn't matter anymore, because he's broken that line of the messaging that had been planned in the mainstream media. So he's a very smart strategist, and he plays out the media very well. If you see in his first, when he stood for elections the first time, he was playing the media like crazy. Everybody across the world had heard the term big beautiful wall. He said, we'll build a wall between Mexico and the United States. And he said, who will pay for it? And his whole, the audience would shout, Mexico will pay for it. So when he actually won, he started building the wall. At that time, he didn't have the numbers in the Congress. And so they put a lot of blocks to prevent the funds from going. He still managed to do more than half of the wall itself, and that reduced already the illegal immigration to a trickle. But interestingly, he actually got Mexico to pay for it. And that was by putting tariffs on Mexico products. He got Mexico to come to the negotiating table through tariffs, where they put their military on the other side to prevent illegal immigration. So instead of US putting its police and its military on their side, Mexico was doing their job on the other side. Now all of these were major negotiating skills and results which he demonstrated at that time, and he actually fulfilled what he said. They paid for it. See, they paid for the wall through tariffs, and they paid for protecting US interests with their military on the other side. none of this was highlighted by mainstream media. But the fact is, he actually did what he had said. So it's in this direction that he works. And recognize always, when he makes these statements, they may seem grandiose. That's as a negotiating strategy, it's his style. But the direction and the outcome are exactly what he claims he will do. So this is regarding the Peace Prize. I thought I would comment a little bit. Luke had a question about the Iran attack. So he said, thank you for the detailed precision you provided in Evenings with Sraddhalu 249. There is one thing I'd like to know. The operation towards the Iranian nuclear facilities was started 15 years ago. And the supercomputer you mentioned has been dedicated to it for a long time. Obama was president from 2009 to 2017. What made it possible to initiate and prepare concretely this operation in this context without Obama or the CIA preventing it up to the Biden's presidency? It's a very good question. How is it that this was not blocked? And the key you will see from two positions here. First, when Trump's team mentioned that they had this program going back 15 years, they mentioned specifically only 2 people were involved in monitoring. Obviously, the 2 would have inputs, they might have a small team under, but these 2 were the key. So what they did, the entire strategy and long-term potential was held in a very small core group. And the core group itself belonged to a specific specialized wing within the military, which is buried under multiple layers. I don't even remember the name of that. It was there in the article that I had posted at that point. And it's one of those special weapons division or something like that. Nobody bothers with those things. No president is bothered about it. Yes, of course, there will be cabal interests, but they don't necessarily know the details of what's happening. At best, they will say, if at all they investigate, oh, these people are monitoring the Iranian nuclear program. That's it. Then when they start designing the bombs, it will be passed through as if a conventional bomb, not specifically mentioning, because these things are blocked in knowledge silos, need to know basis. They will not say it is for bombing Iranian nuclear facilities. Here we are designing various kinds of bombs. We need to simulate this and that situation and run it through the simulation. So the people doing the simulation won't know for what it is or what the objectives are, except these are the parameters and these are the results they want from the simulation. So the whole thing is very carefully siloed, ensuring that the people who know what's happening are also themselves keeping very quiet inside the system. When the time comes, then it is activated. Now this could not have been activated under Joe Biden, for sure. So it would need Trump to come to power for this to be done. And it's one of those things, I'm actually amazed at the nature of the timing, and it really raises a lot of questions about how many things that appear to be coincidental were actually planned. So that's the way the military worked. And this is not just one program, there are many other programs. This is one of the key features I've mentioned before in the early sessions when I spoke about how within the military industrial complex and within the intelligence agencies there were divisions and layers. There was a group that realized that the US had been hijacked by what I have referred to as the Nazi ideology or the Nazi energy, which had taken over as the military industrial complex, fulfilling the same agenda that the Nazis were doing earlier in Europe, but now on a global scale based in the US now. We have discussed that in detail earlier. If you have not watched those, do watch those. It will give you the background. And at that point, I pointed that there were those in the US, which included Kennedy, and who wanted to defend US interests. At that time, particularly, there was one person, James Forrestal, if I remember right, who was later also the US Secretary of Defense. He was Kennedy's senior during the Second World War. He was going to Europe with Kennedy as his assistant. They were going to all these super secret sites where the highest technologies had been developed by the Germans, which included very advanced weapons as well as flying craft. They knew what it was, and they knew that there was this infiltration that had taken place through Operation Paperclip. And so Kennedy was the last US president who actually knew of this takeover that had taken place. James Forrestal, as subsequently as Defense Secretary, uh, was working against the cabal. What happened to him was very unusual. Suddenly they said he is sick. They took him and put him in the US military hospital. And then from the higher floor, supposedly he jumped out, breaking the glass, jumped out of the window and committed suicide, which was totally fake. He was killed. He was suicided, as they say. But this is the kind of struggle that was going on at that point among those who knew what was happening and wanted to prevent it, and the cabal interest which had entrenched. What then they realized was they were not strong enough to counter this, and they went secret, they went underground. A lot of this went under the NSA, what was at that time also a super secret agency. NSA, National Security Agency, supposedly was only involved in communications, but it was multi-layered the way CIA was multi-layered. So this was one of the things I had always found strange. While every intelligence agency will have layers, the US was unusually layered and unusually multi-siloed. So they had programs within programs within programs which are so secret, even US president could not be informed of them. And there were 32 levels of secrecy above US president's level of authority. So there were situations where Kennedy would say, tell me more about this. And the other people would say, that's above your pay grade. We can't tell you. So who's actually in charge? If your programs which the US president is not able to question or know about, then who's really in charge? And that's when you see the reality of the cabal. So there were all these layers. Some of these included advanced extraterrestrial technologies, contact with UFOs and other things. So there were many. The point was there were many such layered, but also they were horizontally layered. So programs within programs. Why particularly? Because they had this group that was set up to counter the cabal. And the group had to create its own parallel infrastructure to be able to first monitor the cabal and then eventually to defeat them. So all of this is part of the culture within the, let's say, white hats interest groups inside US intelligence agencies. So this particular program would be under one of these, not that secret, but would be using such techniques of covering that nobody would know until actually it was time to act. That's in response to Luke's question. So there's a question from Jenny. Thank you for the cohesive explanation of the Iran intervention with all its stunning layers of execution, timing and detail. It brings me much hope for peace in this region. Yes, and you see very interestingly now, and that's why it's useful to see this much after the events have passed. We were still too close at that time. Suddenly across the global media, no talk about Iran at all. Nobody's talking about what was destroyed. And if you really dig deep, you'll find occasionally certain articles which confirm that the entire nuclear manufacturing facilities were totally destroyed. But rather than, at that time when they questioned Trump to make it seem as if he was incompetent, rather than saying he was right, they won't say anything and they just bury the story. But yes, something has shifted majorly within Iran also, and the signs of peace are also actually visible. But let's wait and see what happens. She has two questions, she says. One, why did Trump become so visibly irritated on camera when asked why Israel continued to attack Iran after he had declared peace? Well, he was, because there were groups within Israel which wanted to continue. So remember what I said earlier about many groups and many interests. So there are these groups within Israel which believe, and they have this, they follow certain prophecies and religious beliefs that certain areas have to be cleared up for the future which is prophesied, and it has to be owned by the Jewish people, and something will happen, God will reveal himself. So they have an agenda which goes in that direction. So there is that group. And then there is the military industrial complex equivalent, which I have said within the Israeli military, of which I have spoken also earlier in the attack on the USS Liberty. And so they would want the wars to continue. They would want to provoke responses, or there will be groups which would say, hey, look, we have not completed our agenda. There's still that one point which needed to be blown up. We didn't blow it up. That would complete the agenda. Let's go ahead and do it. But I also pointed out why and how it was obvious Trump was in charge. So he's irritated that those people are not doing exactly what, when he has said that's enough, stop it now. He's in charge, but also recognize that in the hierarchy of a military operation, you cannot allow low-level decisions to be made which are fundamentally contradictory to the overall strategy. Strategy was being held at a level where I had pointed out last time earlier that Trump was directly negotiating with the leadership in Iran and telling them, you do this, we'll back you, otherwise we'll do that, we'll take further steps. So at some point the other leadership would have said, okay, let's talk. At which point, if Trump does not stop all attacks, it will break that negotiation. Now these are things they cannot say in public. Trump cannot say in public, Iran cannot say in public. But it's extremely delicate at that point. You're trying to build trust. And if when you have just said, all right, we have promised we will stop further attacks if you come to negotiating table, and then someone attacks, it'll break that negotiation. So there are things like that. We don't have the full picture, but he would necessarily get upset if something happens on a lower level, contrary to that strategy. And the second question from Jenny, what do you make of Trump's base who are so upset by the fact that Trump intervened and he kept saying he would not put US into situations with other countries unless forced to? I understand why he did this, as it was the perfect timing and destroyed a function of the country that could have destroyed the US. And it was to bring peace through strength. But many in his MAGA base are angered that he made such a dramatic move and are angered that he seems to bind our interest with Israel. What would you say to them to help them understand his move here? So that's also a complex situation from what I have observed, and I'm going purely with my understanding from what I have seen. There are groups within the Trump MAGA base which are hardcore Christian and hardcore evangelical Christian who, because like I've said, religious beliefs are so weird, for them the Jewish people are bad because they killed Christ. So they have a permanent hate against Israel and against any alliance with Israel because it's with Jewish people. Okay. So there's that group which is part of the MAGA base. Then there is the group which really wants peace and does not want any more wars. So if they have not followed the larger strategy of what Trump is doing, then they'll say, oh, he's starting another war with Iran. No, he's just ending a war before it can start. But they don't see that. So that's ignorance, or they've been misled by mainstream media which is constantly saying, oh, Trump is doing something different from what he's actually doing. So there is that group. And then there is the mainstream media presenting to you as if Trump's base is upset with Trump. What they will do is they will selectively pick a few individuals who will come up and say, oh, I respected Trump, I voted for him, but now I'm disappointed, he's going wrong. And they will blow it up as if this person represents the bulk of the Trump base, which is not true. So which of these it is, it's often a blend of these three things, in this particular case at least. And so I would still not give it much importance. Those who have voted for Trump have done it out of genuine recognition that here's a man who's kept his word, there's a track record. So even if he goes off track from what it seems like, let's wait and see and figure out, because he seems to be genuine, he's not going to do something outright wrong. So the bulk of the base there at least is understanding Trump in these terms. And even if they're confused or upset, eventually they do see through. So one of them, particularly, there are a couple of them who are in the US Congress who criticize Trump for having supported Israel. And they're coming from the Christian agenda. And they're hardcore Christians with a Christian agenda, and that confuses their understanding of both Trump's and the United States relationship with Israel and Israel's role. So I've tried to explain what that is from a civilizational point of view in that discussion we had on Israel. And if you understand that, you will appreciate how important it was for the United States to support Israel, but for peace, not for war. To support the group in Israel that wants peace, not the group in Israel that wants war. And so that is also one of those complexities you have to see through. Okay, I'm going to look at the chat box because if there are any questions, today it is intended to cover a lot of things. So. Yes, there are interesting comments people have made, so I'm going to not all take all of them, but just look at questions. So Hema is asking, isn't our corrupt legal system a huge interference of natural law? Yes and no. So it's an attempt to organize law. An attempt. All attempts necessarily will be limited in their scope. In this case, it was an unthought structure. That is, at no point did the Indian lawmakers stop and say, what is it that will work for us? They were, and I'm going to use this word a bit strongly, they were lazy out of inertia of thought. They imitated and replicated the British system without questioning or thinking. Many of them were not sufficiently grounded in their own cultural values. Many were, but many were not. So this blind adaptation, unthinking adaptation was convenient because it avoided the questioning and debate and thought. So what in fact happened when India's constitution was created, it was not that Ambedkar wrote it. That's a wrong idea presented today. He was chairman of a committee which assembled the constitution. And the committee itself had 300 members, if I remember right, or nearly so. I remember reading from Arun Shuri, he has documented this in great detail. And so they went through various constitutions of the world, took out chunks and pieces, packaged them together and put it all together, and Ambedkar was the chairman. He himself didn't think much of it. So there's a statement which Arun Shuri quotes him as saying, at the end of that whole exercise under Nehru, he takes that whole Indian constitution in parliament, it's on record. He says, I do not consider this document worth the paper on which it is printed. In other words, he recognized that it was a hack job. These are very painful statements to view in hindsight. The question should have been then, what is it that you should have done that would have been worth the paper, or maybe more worth than the paper itself? And that thought never was brought in under Nehru, unfortunately. It was a replica of the British system. And so we have a failed system which has not worked in the past, which does not work at all. It's not suited for the Indian people or the mindset. And then we have also, along with that, the same continuing, what I have described as laziness of mind, inertia of mind, which continued all through. And every subsequent system or individual entrenched in the system is not interested in changing. It's a huge step that the Modi government has actually pushed through a new criminal code and even named it in Indian terms. So it's called the BNS, Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita. Even that as a name is unheard of. It would have been normally written in English because, British were our masters and English is the link language, because if you do anything in Sanskrit, there'll be enough people who will say, hey, that's imposing on us. You see, your enemies are sitting in your own home. So to accept a foreigner as your leader is your convenient way to avoid internal debate with the irrational enemies within home. And it's a huge step that Modi government actually managed to do this and slam it through. And it seems to have worked at least, but it's a small step. You need a whole revamp of the judicial system itself, which they cannot do because the system has entrenched itself and is refusing to correct itself from within. So I don't know what form it will take, but it will have to happen. It will have to be a crushing pressure which will break it. So to Hema's question, yes, it's not natural law, but if you have to, and because we are a rational age, we need to have a rational structure which is reasonably objective, but not reduced to pure objectivism, which doesn't work. So how do you balance that? You have to start the process at least. And I'm saying it's not going to be easy. It will have to make compromises, but at least it'll work better than what we currently have, which is totally broken, because it'll be better suited for the people. One such, and it's the most obvious form in which we can take one step forward, is for certain types of cases we should be able to solve it with the structure that exists of the village elders sitting with the people who have a problem and sorting it out there and then, which is the panchayat framework. You know each other. You know when the person is lying, when he is not lying. And you agree to something because of the track record that you know of the people. It's doable. It's not difficult at all. And it can be done. So there are methods we could very quickly kickstart this process. Yes, Jessica comments, the military-industrial complex has a budget, and if they don't spend that money regularly, it gets removed. That's one of the reasons for great wastefulness in all governments, even in India. I remember it was a bit of a shock in one of the universities. They were spending money to buy new computers and going for the most expensive, at the time Apple computers, for no benefit advantage at all. In fact, you'd be locked in their ecosystem. And I said, why? And they said, because we have to spend so much. And if we don't spend it this year, we won't get the money next year. As a reason for spending, it's the most stupid thing. And you're going the wrong track. And there are entire businesses which thrive on this falsehood. Shouldn't it rather be that you have the budget, you draw on it as you need for the work you need, and if you save, well, that's carried forward to the next year. Why not? But that's not how the bureaucracy works. It doesn't think. It's on momentum of precedent. So who's going to question this? I still would want Modi government to make that change. It's not yet happened. They've made a lot of breakthroughs, but this kind of thing has not changed yet. But yes, it's the military-industrial complex's benefit also. Rabi's question, when will this game end? When you wake up. And that's why this discussion. They cannot continue when they know that you can see through their game. As long as they can play you, they will continue because they can, and they will get away with it. There's actually a certain mindset. I'm going to try to convey this. See if you can get it, catch something of it. Let's say now you are leader of industry or politician or cabal leader. You're looking at the situation. You've just made massive profits on pharmaceuticals, on stock markets, on selling weapons, selling poisons to people. You're seeing their misery, and you obviously have nothing. You're a sociopath, so it doesn't bother you. You are happy with your profits. You're looking at them, and somebody exposes you. You say, haha, let them do what they like. Nobody's going to believe them because all the other sheep are sleeping. Wait. Suppose now he has said something and there's a ripple, now the sheep are waking up. You call up somebody and immediately there are half a dozen news articles which attack that person or expose some moral wrong he has done or make some allegation against him, and he gets buried and everybody says, yes, we've forgotten. You've just accomplished this within a few days with just one phone call. You look at that situation and you laugh at these sheep. These are hackable people, they are worthy of being hacked. You don't care. What is the one thing you would be afraid of? That they wake up. If they wake up and you cannot hack them, you cannot manipulate them, your entire empire collapses. This is the reality from that position. But this is also the way they laugh. They know that you will not wake up because you don't care. You would rather be carried away by some appearance. So I give an example. This particular issue is becoming too public. Let's change the subject in the news cycle. So as happened a few months ago, I don't remember, in New Delhi, there was a bomb that exploded outside the wall of a school. To this day, nobody knows who did it. But it happened immediately. The news cycle diverted, started talking about bomb, safety of students, safety of children. You must start putting video cameras everywhere. And of course, you have your investment in the video camera companies. So you have triggered that with one phone call and immediately your profits shoot up. You just played them out, changed the subject in the news cycle. You laugh at their stupidity. You laugh at the fact that the sheep don't want to think. You are sitting on an elite level of power and authority where you can manipulate them. This is the mindset. If you can catch how this works, you can catch the way they look at you. The one thing they fear is that you wake up. And the moment you wake up, you recognize and you say, no, enough of this. You meaning more of us, enough of us. The game ends. They cannot continue anymore. And that's why That's one of the reasons why this series on current affairs. Jessica comments, the birth and rebirth of nations, great nations, is messy and painful. Yes, but why? Because people don't want to wake up. The change is compelled. The mother's warning was, she says something to this effect, either humanity has to wake up, agree to wake up and change, or it will be compelled by the force of crashing circumstances. That's the exact phrase. By the force of crashing circumstances, that the change will be imposed. So really the point is, do we choose to make that change, or will the crashing circumstances compel that change? I am still looking at this biggest failure in India is on the educational system. And it's now the force of crashing circumstances through artificial intelligence that we're going to have to recast the education system and question it. It'll happen, but it'll happen through much pain, through great shock, through great destruction. But if we had done this 10 years ago or 50 years ago, today we would have been leaders in the domain of knowledge, growth, even consciousness. Because after all, education is about also this conscious awakening to higher consciousness, if done correctly. And a very good example of this is China. The way China has managed its education, but also its overall strategy for economic, industrial, research growth. Today, one of the things which I keep seeing, it's amazing to see that some of the biggest breakthroughs, one of the key authors will be a Chinese. Maybe a Chinese immigrant in the United States. Some of them have also affiliations with their home country. They're technically US citizens, but the Chinese are playing a critical role there. In the same way as Indians have played in the Silicon Valley at one point, and today many Indians are at the head of many of these big companies. But that, to me, that's not so important. The core research, fundamental research, where you're making breakthroughs in materials properties and new technologies at a fundamental level, that's defining future leadership. So the new batteries which are coming out of China are now way ahead of anything the US has. Why couldn't India start this 10 years ago? And we still don't see that happening. Maybe there are first some signs now, especially after Operation Sindoor, that this agenda of Modi to make India self-reliant has triggered some movement in the right direction. But it's still not caught in the same way as China had organized, for two reasons. China is a monolith. The government itself is a dictatorship, but a benevolent dictatorship. What it decides, the entire machinery of the country moves together. In India, you make a decision at the center and you have 1,000 people who will oppose it. And you're pushing against that opposition. It goes much slower. But the advantage is, there's the potential for correction, because in the very act of opposing, you're raising issues which need to be taken into account. So China can make huge mistakes, but when it moves in the right way, it moves rapidly and massively. This is the first big difference. The second big difference is, in China, through the educational system, the love for the nation has been inculcated. In India, rather, you were taught from childhood to dislike and even feel embarrassed about your national identity, your traditions, your ancient values. To this day, in our textbooks, we still don't have deeper knowledge which come from the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita or the stories of the Ramayana or Mahabharata. Because if you do that, then again you have your own enemies within the country who will pound say, hey, that is religious teaching. No, it's not. These are some of the most deep spiritual and philosophical and essential truths of reality. They are like a science. You can't say science is religious just because the scientists were Christians in Europe. It's not religious. What they find is reality of nature that you see objectively. And the Upanishads are of that category, and most of India's traditions. But you have those enemies who will block your own identity emerging, and this is what they fear. They fear India's identity emergent. And so every time that happens, they'll say, oh, that's right wing, that's Hindu agenda, etc. But it's happening inevitably, it's happening slowly because of this internal opposition. You do not have the pride in your country, so it makes for certain corrections to move much slower. So that's where China has two big advantages. And so yes, rebirth of nation is messy, painful, and often in proportion to the potential that it has. It's an interesting point. Eric says, do you believe that the name Big Beautiful Bill in America, that's how Trump promoted his bill, may be a so-called counter mantra to build back better? I didn't think about it, but it makes a lot of sense. So there is one of these things which goes into a domain which is somewhat occult, that the Cabal has, especially the satanic dimension of the Cabal, uses a lot of mantras, or the principle of the mantra, but in a negative way. It's there through cinema. They push certain key phrases and certain forms of behavior. It's going a lot through music videos particularly, and through key phrases politicians use. And these are often programmed to trigger certain kinds of behavior and responses. And the programming itself is done using technologies I've mentioned before. So one of the things you saw with around the time of COVID, all these cabal-controlled politicians, all of them came out with the phrase, build back better. B. And that's not by chance. That's the alliteration, which is like the mantric repetition and the amplifying the power of that sound. And it was build back better was said to be like a trigger, in which basically what they would do is switch to a socialist communist system where the government would control everything, and the build back meant first you had to destroy, and then you would rebuild in the model of the communist ideology. So this was the thing you saw repeated all across. All the cabal politicians in US and Europe were repeating this. And I did not realize until Eric points out that Trump repeating Big Beautiful Bill again and again, I don't know, perhaps it is, or it's a coincidence, I don't know. But it's an interesting observation. Yes, Jessica points out Obama is being investigated for creating the Russia election interference. That's one of the things Trump is doing, which will actually put many of these politicians, take them legally to the responsibility that is due. Oh, there was the second thing I wanted to mention. This is very important, I remember now. So what happened under Joe Biden was, if you saw him in the alternate media, you saw that very often he was completely spaced out. He would stand there with a blank stare for several minutes, or he would stop talking in the middle of his speech and suddenly switch to something totally meaningless. Or he would walk off, shake hands as if in the air, walk away, and weird behavior, all of which show that he had some serious mental issues, which now have been admitted by his doctors. And Trump has started an investigation into this to show how far it goes back, to expose. Now, we all knew it was there from the beginning, but it has to be evidenced. So even Joe Biden's official doctor has pleaded the Fifth Amendment, meaning that he will not incriminate himself, he will not answer questions. And that shows you the level of cover-up that's happening. But they've also announced that he has cancer, but the cancer has been there already for 2 years. So they were officially lying to the entire country. But meanwhile, while all this was happening, Joe Biden was largely living in his own home, not even in the White House, for days together sometimes, for weeks together. And during that time, there were still signatures going out with the presidential executive orders. Who was signing them? Not Biden. So they had what is called a stamp. It's called an auto sign or auto stamp, and they were stamping his signature on documents and releasing them. Who was stamping those? Again, the names are not known. They found out at least 3 of the names by now, but at that time they were not known. And Joe Biden, was he in the know? No. He didn't even know what he was signing or what was being signed in his name for a long time. So technically, many of those things would be illegal. So once they started this, it's called the auto pen. When they started checking the auto pen, they found that there was not one auto pen, but there were up to 4 auto pens. So they would have exact same signatures, copies of this across many documents, and then another series of documents which had a different auto pen, and up to 4 auto pens were in the loose. Who was using those while Biden was in his home? And these were the people actually running America at that point in the name of the president, signing orders in the name of the president. And this is very disturbing, and it is completely illegal. So this is a major investigation that has started under Trump. And when this is taken through to its logical conclusion, you're going to see a lot of arrests. And we'll see what form it takes. But it'll be interesting to watch. So Trump has much bigger issues going on. Certainly, eventually, the whole clientele of Epstein will also, in some form, be taken or will have to face their consequences, because many of these were pedophiles. That will also happen. But I do think it will take a little longer. And remember, it has to go through the official legal system where evidence is critical. So start with the things where the evidence is strong, get them on those grounds, not necessarily through the Epstein list, although they may have been on the Epstein list. And that's the way Trump seems to be currently heading. So RP is saying, make Bharat great again. Bharat is India. When you speak of India in the vernacular, it's not India. It's what the British called India. What India called India is Bharat. So make Bharat great again. We need to bring the song Vande Mataram in every school, theatre, festival, etc. Yes, this is a very interesting point, and I'm glad you brought it up. So, Sri Aurobindo wrote that India was given 2 mantras for her awakening. The first mantra is Vande Mataram, for which the Rishi was Rishi Bankim Chandra. So he's the Rishi who sees the mantra and gives to it a form. And it is Vande Mataram. Vande Mataram literally translated as victory to the Divine Mother. Victory to Mother, but Mother India, who is also Divine Mother. So victory to Mother India. It was the mantra on which the entire freedom movement sustained and was won. But when India became free, and was divided, unfortunately, it was at that point that this would have become the national anthem. But the group which wanted Pakistan and did not go to Pakistan and stayed in India now raised the problem, saying, but we cannot worship India as mother because of religious issues. Therefore, you can't have that. So, Vande Mataram was set aside and made into a national song, and what was made the national anthem was the song written in praise of King George V. That was made the national anthem. I've spoken about this before, I won't repeat. So, this was the first loss. The mantra itself was removed. So, RP has a valid point here saying this needs to be brought back. And yes, if you want to keep national anthem, do it, but end with the technically national song, but let that be in the lips of everybody, worship of Mother India and as Divine Mother. So then, yes, this would lead to a great awakening. But this was the first mantra, which is the second mantra. That is interesting. And then Sri Aurobindo writes in that article, he says, and the second mantra has yet to be revealed. This was in the article he wrote during those days of the freedom struggle. Subsequently, there was another article where he tells you what that second mantra is. And that is from the Bhagavad Gita, which is quoted in the 18th chapter as, I translate in English first, abandon all dharmas and take refuge in me alone, God says, and I will deliver thee from all sin and evil. Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shucha. Do not grieve, I will liberate you from all difficulties. So this abandoning all dharmas in alignment to a self-giving to the divine will, in service to the divine will, You see, it would be a natural consequence from Vande Mataram. But this is a spiritual poise which goes beyond the emotional and devotional content to becoming a conscious instrument of the divine, for which the country is not yet ready, or not enough people are ready. And that's why the second mantra is still in abeyance, or waiting to be activated by when enough people awaken to this. And which effectively means you have to be consciously choosing the sadhana of becoming a conscious instrument to the divine. And more in India, at least in leadership positions, decision-making positions, should be able to do that. And as that happens, this mantra will also work through them to liberate more and more. Yes, and I don't know if we have almost finished our time. Jessica comments that yes, there are pictures of Clinton getting a shoulder massage from a 16-year-old girl, and that lady now recently killed herself. She was in Australia. And she was not the type, she had already said that she would never commit suicide, but she was as if made to commit suicide. So yes, there is a lot of that happening, and it's a very powerful cabal group that will protect its own interests. So in terms of battles, that's not the direct route through which you can bring those people to consequence. You have to go through other routes, knowing those are still your targets. And in my opinion, that's why Trump is not pushing too hard on the Epstein list. There is of course a deeper dimension that Epstein list itself is not the real list, because Epstein's right hand was Maxwell, who was actually handling the list. She was the real person organizing. She's still alive, she's still in jail, and if at all she speaks, people will go to jail. So protecting that or working through that would be the way. Epstein is almost irrelevant. It is the institution that is Epstein, who's represented by this woman, that will be probably the way it might happen. But let's not anticipate too much. I'm trying to show you rather the strategy viewpoint that would be relevant from Trump's perspective. That you go for the big fish, but with methods that would actually stick in court, and other things you keep for as that unfolds. Yes. So Rajesh says, I remember eating Burger King once and I did not enjoy, and it felt I had cravings for more. And that's one of the poisons which creates the cravings. Yes, in fact, the purpose of that is these things have actually, monosodium glutamate, for example, is intended to trigger cravings. You eat a little bit and then it triggers the need to keep on eating, and the more you eat, the more you feel the need, and your stomach is full but you're still not satisfied. And these are all done chemically. They're triggered, they're intentionally done to sell more. But what is the consequence in your stomach? So there are various videos. There was a documentary which worked on the food. I don't remember the name. If someone remembers it, you can type it out. Where they showed you, and they interviewed people who would design these foods which are sold by these multinationals. In some of them, they would add paper in ice cream to give you the sense of the milk cream, what we call malai in India, in Hindi. To give you the sense of that, because that easily dissolves in ice cream, it can get frozen and structure broken. They put pieces of paper. So as you ate, you had these little pieces of paper that would come in your mouth, and you thought that was the cream. Oh, you said, oh, this is wonderful, I'm enjoying the cream. And the ice cream itself, if it's going to melt by mistake and then reharden, loses all its structure. So it was made of foam which was frozen, it was never ice cream. So much of what you eat in the United States as ice cream is frozen foam with all this paper and other chemicals for various kinds of flavors and taste and smells. Everything was manufactured, nothing was real. And in the advertising, they will say, with real flavor, or with the flavor of real mango, or whatever it is, flavor of real mango. And they lie to you in this way, and you don't think, because you're programmed. You say, oh, real mango is written big and flavor of is small, so you don't notice. It's got real mango, how wonderful. And how much is real mango? Even if it were, it would be 1% or 0.%. They put a little powder, we put real mango. All the rest is constructed materials. So yes, there's a lot of that kind of poisoning going on. And under JFK, RFK Jr., hopefully a lot of this will be corrected. But the process has started, and for me that's already a huge step. So far it had not even started. There was no hope even of it starting. Yes, so I think we're going to bring this to a close for today. I want to close with a comment. Okay, just one more last question. Okay, Sonance, two questions I'm going to take. Resonance is saying, you talked about NSA. Can you share anything about Edward Snowden? Yes, Edward Snowden, who came out exposing the intelligence community and its methods, and even some of its software and techniques. And then he was chased, and then he escaped from the US with his hard disks. He ended up being in Hong Kong, releases those hard disks, and then he escapes to Russia and then lives in Russia. Do you think the CIA could not find him? Do you think the NSA could not find him? How did he even get away? And how did he release all this? And he didn't do it in one go. He released through many tranches, through certain journalists who became famous, obviously, for having done that. And he continued to do that sitting in Hong Kong. How did he manage that? And do you think they would have allowed him? And the underlying truth, as we found out, was he represented a CIA front to attack the NSA. What had happened was, under Obama, they were trying to dismantle all the opposition to the cabal interests. And NSA had this, so they had to break the NSA's independence, bring it under purview of the president and reduce its powers. And so this was a hit job internally within intelligence community. He was protected by the CIA, allowed to do all this mischief, settle in Russia, etc., or even release these things, protected by the CIA while he was doing a hit job on the NSA. So it's one of those complex things. If you don't have the background, you wouldn't understand. And that's why even today he's free. He can get away with anything. Normally, anybody who had gone to the point where he released the first tranche would have either been arrested or assassinated or silenced in some way. And he continued multiple tranches. That cannot be done unless he is protected. Who would protect him in Hong Kong? And it was not even China. So, and the second question, I will take this as last. Someone called first, last. Why are people of insincerity and malice in possession of power? It's a very important question. The simple reason is because they took the trouble to seize power. People of sincerity and goodwill, often out of a kind of a perverse ego, will say, I am not interested in power, or because they are good-willed and often sensitive, when there's a head-on collision with another for the struggle for power, these people will back down to avoid nastiness. And the nasty people will deliberately make it nasty so you back off so that they can seize the chair. And they do it deliberately. I've seen this, I don't want to give too personal an example, but in the government institution, where somebody who was corrupt was removed and someone put who was non-corrupt. All the people who were using the corrupt person ganged up against this one person and threatened, literally threatened. Who are you? How dare you? If you don't do this, we will do this. We will throw you out. We will ensure your reputation is ruined. They gave all the possible threats. Speaking of space nearby. Why? Because they can do it and get away with it, and the person is not complying, and they'll make it so nasty the person will resign, back off, or yield. They don't care. So when you're facing and in a struggle for power, this was a general observation that the mother made, that it is still in the hands of the Asuric forces. And you have to be as strong as them or as persistent as them or willing to take the pain with the thick skin that they have, survive with your more sensitive skin. Be at least as strong as them. And you must be willing to fight. You cannot say, I will give up because I am more pure, I am more special, I am more spiritual, I am whatever it is. And this was the failure of spirituality which became ascetic. When spirituality became ascetic, it withdrew from wealth it withdrew from power and therefore lost both. And Sri Aurobindo's observation, these things have to be won back now. Because we gave it away to the Asura, you have to win it back. So coming to your question, why are people of insincerity and malice in position of power? Because we let them. Because we left this space free. Because we backed off. And it is essential that if you have the power, you stick to it. The problem is when you come under their attack, the risk is that you might become as crude and coarse as them to survive. That should not happen. So the challenge is this: can you maintain your spiritual core and goodness and purity and sincerity, etc., and under pressures survive and not be corrupted? If you can do this, that's the future leadership. Those who can do this are the future leadership. And we are at that stage in world affairs where people with this are actually getting opportunities. Slowly it's happening. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's happening. It's happening first within the domain of large companies, at least, or startup culture. Elon Musk is an excellent example of this. Political space is more difficult, but at least as long as Modi is there, he is ensuring a certain degree of cleanliness within the political space that allows such people to come to power. And initially he came to power because he was backed by the RSS, and he replaced a very corrupt fellow. And when he came to power, he was selected. Had he gone through the electoral process, he could never have come to that position, because they would have weeded him out because they were all corrupt. So he was selected and placed on top, and he had to clean the system so that he could survive, and then rebuild the system from scratch with people who were competent. I remember at that time he had just come to power. A few years down, I was in Gujarat. I had been invited for some program by the government, and there were two occasions. One was that, there was another occasion. I had a program where the mayor of the city was brought. And so I chatted. This was a lady. She was so nice and calm and cool, not at all like a politician. I said, "What are you doing as a mayor?" She said, "No, Modi is trying to clean up the system, so he asked me if I would be willing to be mayor." I said, "Okay, yes." I don't know anything about this. It's a whole new world. Very innocent and pure intention. But it was possible because someone at the top created that space. I don't know how long she lasted, but certainly if she did good, she would have done. Whether she did something, I don't know what was the level of competence. But if she did, she would have done well, because that was the type of the person. So I'm saying that there is an opportunity today because of these huge disruptive forces, but also the divine force working through these disruptions is creating spaces where people with the right capacity and intention and aligned to something higher, willing to work it out the hard way, can get a chance. But you must be strong. You must be able to be resilient and hold firm your ground. Not given to the insincerity and malice, which on the other side will push back hard, because they're losing their power. So they will push hard, they will get desperate, and you should be able to be firm. For that you need a spiritual base, a deep equality, a deep peace, a deep inner strength or power, a strong vital which is aligned and open to the higher spiritual power. Something is needed which can hold firm despite all that. And it will happen, it can happen still. So I hope that helps you to understand why it has happened, but also what you can do to correct for it. I'm going to end with, oh yes, sorry. Suraj says now we'll start learning Mandarin language. Yes, perhaps, I don't know, but not necessary. There was another question somebody had asked, should I buy Lenovo computers? So I'll make close with this. Vivek had asked, so is it a wise choice because it's owned by a Chinese company? The thing is this, you have no secret to hide. They're not interested in you. At best, they are mining your data to train their AI. That's about it. Don't worry. Go for whatever computer is best, irrespective of where it's produced. And maybe it's produced in China. But notice what Modi has done, and it's being done very carefully. They're shifting the entire manufacturing base of high technology to India. Apple has already agreed to this. Under Trump, this is being promoted through US companies. So more and more high-end technology will be produced in India as a counterbalance to China. It will still continue in China. China will still have a leadership position. But when it happens in India, you'll actually have a choice. But these are decisions made now which take 10 years to fully fructify. and you must have the patience, but you must have take the decision and start doing it. When you can, when you have a choice, you will exercise the choice. When you don't have a choice, just go with what it is. You have nothing to hide. If you have something to hide, we'll take the defensive measures as much as possible. So I'm going to end with one quotation from the mother, and this is going to be perhaps helpful for us to understand how things work from a higher spiritual perspective. Because it's not as if from the higher perspective the decision is made and it happens in the way we think. So somebody asked the mother, this is 1953, 29th July. Mother, you told us one day that all that happens to us has been decided in advance. What does that mean? So mother said, no, that's not how it is, and it's probably not how she said it. But what she said is that certain things can be perceived at a certain level, and from there it is inevitable to happen. So she says it was going to happen here because already up there it has happened. That's why it's been decided in advance. And then she says, I'm going to give you an example which perhaps will make you understand. I do not remember exactly when it happened. It must have been sometime in the year 1920 probably, perhaps earlier, perhaps 1914-15, but I don't think so. It was sometime in the year 1920. One day, every day I used to meditate with Sri Aurobindo. He used to sit on one side of a table and I on the other, on the veranda. And one day, in this way, in meditation, I entered, how to put it, I went up very high, entered very deep, or came out of myself. Well, whatever one may say does not express what happened. These are merely ways of speaking. I reached a place or a state of consciousness from which I told Sri Aurobindo just casually and quite simply, India is free. This later Sri Aurobindo commented was from the over-mental consciousness. It was in 1920. Then he put to me a question, how? And I answered him without any fight, without a battle, without a revolution. The English themselves will leave, for the condition of the world will be such that they won't be able to do anything else except go away. It was done. I spoke in the future when he asked me the question. But there, where I had been, where I had seen, I said India is free. It was a fact. India was not free at that time. It was 1920. Yet it was there. It had been done. And it happened in 1947. That is to say, from the external physical point of view. I saw it 27 years in advance, but it had been done. Now, mother is saying, you see, they are not used to boasting. It's not in their temperament. So she says, I saw it happen. The fact is, they were working for freedom. They made it happen. So it was done on that plane, and then it took 27 years to actualize. But I mentioned before, it would have happened within 2 years, except for Gandhi misdirecting it and delaying it. But she doesn't discuss all that here. Then the person asks, could you see Pakistan? Mother, no. For the freedom could have come about without Pakistan, without division of India. Indeed, if they had listened to Sri Aurobindo, there would have been no Pakistan. Well, externally it seems to take time, but in fact it is like that. So then they ask, what happens if there's a catastrophe? Can you avoid it? And mother says yes, etc. But this point I want to make. Why did India get divided? Why the partition? When over there it was decided and inevitably it would have happened here, why the partition? So from there to here something came in which divided things. So Sri Aurobindo says later that it was from the over-mental consciousness, so it has a potential still that there will not be perfect action, but there will be potential for division of some kind. That's a different theoretical basis. But why? Because on the human level, there was not sufficient alignment to the divine will. When she says if people had listened to Sri Aurobindo, there would have been no Pakistan. And this is to tell you that while the divine will may act, while the mother's grace may act from above, its translation through a human instrument is critical, and for the instrument to be completely transparent, or enough instruments in the action in the domain where the action has to take place, is necessary for it to be fully worked out in its ideal optimum way. To the extent that humanity is unready or refuses or opposes, that will still happen, but it will happen with delays and transitional stages. So in this case, partition of India is one such transitional stage. Eventually there will be a reunion of some kind. Maybe stronger, maybe more perfect, doesn't matter. The point is there's a delay. And so in the current struggle, in the current battle which is ongoing, this is also a problem. That we need to have active instruments. And each one of us, even if we are here doing nothing, we are not sitting next to Trump or with Elon Musk or Modi, or we are in our space. Where we are, we have to do what we can do. And to them who are in that battleground, on an extreme battle where even it's a question of life or death for them, and there are so many attempts to kill them from the cabal, goodwill, prayer, protection from our side will be a great help. But the fact that we are aligned also to the overall intention is part of that help, which we can extend through prayer, but also through our state of consciousness in supporting all good efforts that happen. And especially be careful, do not identify, as I said before, with a general group, race, institution, name, title, whatever. That would be an error. Understand there are multiple forces. Even within an individual, sometimes there are multiple interests and forces struggling. Align with the ideal, align with the positive forces of light and evolutionary forces, even if it is working through a person which you may or may not like. That's not important. Is it an instrument, even partially, for an evolutionary upward turn? Well, you are supporting that, the overall intention of the divine force, and it's working through people and circumstances. This is extremely important. To the extent that there are more of us in a receptive base and actively aligned to that in our own personal lives, it allows for that action to be more complete, more direct, with less such delays and partial or indirect steps. The divine force ultimately is all powerful, but it must go through transitional steps according to the receptivity of the circumstance and of the people. And this is where we can make a very big difference. So let's all aspire for this and consciously pray for the best outcome in this evolutionary unfolding. Namaste.